and a very, very hard worker all along the way. I've been watching your campaign, and just it's a thrill to see somebody throwing so much energy into unseating Chuck Schumer, and now hopefully the Gildebrand, the other one. Uh, anyway, you don't need much of an introduction to my audience. We are all fans, so welcome, Diane.
Well, thanks very much. I am really happy to be here. Shall I
Well,
start?
good. No,
Oh,
I heard. Well, I had a note from one of your producers that you've been working very hard on the Syria issue, and so I thought I'd toss that at you first if you want to
sure.
start there. As I say, I've been off on vacation, so I'll need to get updates from you on probably a number of issues.
Okay. Well, before you left on vacation, as you know, there was this horrific earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey very hard. At least 50,000 lives lost. The difference between the two places is that, of course, Syria has been under sanctions, and these particularly brutal sanctions called the Caesar sanctions, which were, or it's called the Caesar Civilian Protection Act of 2019. They always have these Orwellian names for things, which would not even allow, it was designed to make sure there could be no reconstruction. And because of these sanctions, no one has been allowed to send any aid to Syria in the wake of the quake. And because of the sanctions, they didn't have spare parts for heavy earth moving equipment or things like that. So, whereas in Turkey, we saw these kind of gut wrenching but sublime stories of families surviving for 2 days under the rubble and then being located, there really couldn't be much of that in Syria, if any, because people simply could not move anything. There are 5 million people in Syria now homeless as a result. The US Treasury Department and our uh, government claims that we lifted some of the sanctions, but that's only for specific forms of aid. So someone actually came up to some of our organizers in the field and said they had started a GoFundMe to send, they raised $15,000 to send aid to Syria, and GoFundMe said you have to refund all that money because the Treasury will not allow it to be sent. So really cruel that. And then on top of it, we have 900 troops in Syria whose sole purpose is to steal the oil and steal the wheat. They're in the northeastern area of Deir ez-Zor, and this is apparently a very fertile area and also has a lot of oil.
But
So there was an
wait, wait
what?
just a minute. You said they were there to steal the oil, and I didn't bat an eye. But then you said, and the wheat. I said, wait a minute. We don't steal wheat. Come on, come
We
on.
we
We are,
steal it
are
from.
we actually stealing wheat? As I mean, oil is something I think everybody like steals now and then. If you're
Right.
a great power, just suck some of it out of somebody else's land. It happens all the time. But I mean, actually stealing
No,
the
this
wheat.
is under the policy of sanctions where you try and force a population by torturing them through starvation and deprivation to overthrow their government. So we are forcing the Syrian population to starve. And in fact, our State Department spokesman, Ned Price, was so despicable. When the sanctions question came up, he said, "Oh, Assad has been gassing his own people. Why should we try and help people whose government is cruel to them?" Now, first of all, that's not even true about Assad, but what kind of logic is that? I mean, suppose it were true. So, because he's cruel to the people of Syria, we should be also. And then, or you have the argument, well, we don't want to send any relief because Assad will just take credit for helping people. It's really evil. Now, if you want to know how bad the theft is, I was just reviewing an interview that the Syrian ambassador to China gave to Global Times in September of 2022, and he said that there's the current oil production in Syria is 80,000 barrels a day. That's down uh, by 80%. It used to be 385,000 barrels a day. So it's already a pittance, a fraction of what it was. The U.S. troops are taking 66,000 of those 80,000 barrels of oil. So people are having terrible energy shortages, terrible food shortages. And to add insult to injury, the head of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, just went to Syria. Now, they didn't invite our troops. They don't want us there. They certainly don't want the head of the Joint Chiefs coming over there. The Syrian Foreign Ministry has protested that. And there is now a bill in the U.S. House of Representatives introduced by Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida to withdraw our troops from Syria. This would be great, and it's going to be voted on perhaps Wednesday. So we need everybody listening to call their congressman to get them to support this thing. It's House Concurrent Resolution, or HCON R21. There are two bills, apparently. One was House Concurrent Resolution number 20, which said the troops had to be withdrawn within 15 days of it passing. Then I think he got a lot of feedback from the military, and they said that really was not feasible, but that the troops should be withdrawn within 180 days. So the House Concurrent Resolution number 21 says withdrawn within 6 months, basically, within 180 days, get all of our troops out of there. And these should pass, and we're targeting the whole Congress. They were trying very hard to get a Democrat co-sponsor. I don't know if they've gotten one yet, and I know there's a bunch of meetings up on Capitol Hill that we're doing, members of the Schiller Institute, this week to try and get additional sponsors on that.
Yes, and I recognize a continuing interest in Syria on your part and the Schiller Institute's part, and really very few institutions are taking an active role to try to speak up for Syria. What kind of voice does Syria have in the U.S. and in the U.S. media? How do they try to overcome, which obviously is a lot of bias from our politicians and our media on both sides of the aisle, frankly?
No, it's terrible. I mean, that seems to be the one area where both parties agree, is if we can crush somebody else. They line up pretty nicely on that. I don't know. I mean, there's certain parts of the United States where you have large numbers of immigrants from Southwest Asia, like the Detroit area, or Paterson, New Jersey has a fairly large Syrian population. Unfortunately, the ones in Paterson, I think, are really anti-Assad, so I don't know. But I can't imagine they'd want everyone back home to suffer as a result. So there isn't much. Were rallies called by this, what is it? It's a Jordanian group for this past Saturday, and I led a rally in New York City where we had just about 12 or 15 people, but we went to a very busy location downtown, and I had a bullhorn and we all had signs, so we were able to get quite a bit of attention to it. And then there was a rally also in Los Angeles organized by the Schiller Institute. I heard there was a rally in, I think it was Germany, which actually had about 100 people at it. But we should press the Congress. You may remember when Obama was going to bomb Syria back in, I think it was 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And we ran a huge operation to get Congress to stop him. And they did end up saying, no, he had to come to Congress. He couldn't just do that first. And then also Putin intervened and said, look, what if Syria agreed to get rid of all their chemical weapons? And Putin really pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire on that one, for which he has never been justly recognized, I would say.
What a fascinating story it is to study the career of Vladimir Putin as much as we can. And those of us that haven't, and I'm one of them, I've spent so much of my time just trying to catch up on my American politics and what's been going on, especially from the Kennedy assassination forward. But We also have to study the foreign leaders, and to study Putin is really, really important right now. Um, it's interesting to see, the oligarchs of Russia that apparently were almost appointed by Yeltsin and the Americans that were working with Yeltsin through Brzezinski and others. And yet, it also appears to be the case that Putin leads an independent group that is really dedicated to the sovereignty and the preservation of Russia, as opposed to personal wealth, which was the desire of those who set up the system. So now, from Syria, which is, of course, a famous Russian ally that is a thorn in the side of those NATO people that want to crush Russia, to Ukraine, and all along the eastern front, if we could call it that, almost to that terrible resonance from World War II. But there is a big war going on. The front must be 500 miles long, if I can guess at it from looking at maps, and there's hundreds and hundreds of soldiers being killed every day. Um, is all of this all about Russia, Diane? All about the same old story that the British American financial system is dedicated to the destruction of Russia in order to loot it and its resources, and uh, that just basically takes over most of the world.
Well, yes, it is that. And in fact, in 2011, when the US and France and the British murdered Gaddafi in Libya, LaRouche warned this is about going to war with Russia. He said it'll be Syria, Iran, Russia. And sure enough, turns out Benghazi, of course, was later in 2012, was a transshipment point for weapons from Libya into the ISIS terrorists in Syria. And the idea was kind of an encirclement of Russia. Russia wasn't playing that game. And you remember 2015 when Putin announced that the United Nations that Russia simply was not going to allow the overthrow of the Assad regime. And they didn't. And then you had something which disturbed me horribly. If you remember, on Christmas Day of 2016, the famous Russian Red Army Chorus, a troupe of dancers and singers,
Yes.
were on their way to Syria for the holidays for the Russian troops who were so valiantly fighting to liberate the nation from these terrorists. And the plane crashed in the Black Sea and everybody died. That was just, hearing of that accident was something I will never forget. And it just seemed the amount of insults and injury um, that have been heaped upon Russia by the West. I must say, we are very, very fortunate that Putin is so cool and not a hothead, because I think the world might have been blown up 5 times over if he were just to react in a flippant, aggressive way to every provocation that's occurred.
Well, that takes me back to my days when I was singing in a production of the Washington Revels, and back in the '80s, and we had a Russian uh, vocal group that came, the Dmitry Petrovsky Ensemble, and they were absolutely fantastic. And one of them played the trumpet in a way that reminded me of the trumpet player that famously always shows up in the Red Army Chorus productions, who I had seen at the Kennedy Center maybe 10 years earlier. His name was Shurik, and he told me about Russia, and I really, that's the first time I've had a personal connection with a Russian person. But the musical connection is what I think you are the most touched by as a musician yourself, and me, and thinking about, what in the world is wrong? Why a chorus? Why a bunch of musicians? why these artists, and of course, if there was intent, then the intent was to cause pain, to cause emotional stress, to hurt you, Diane, to hurt me, and to hurt millions of people around the world who think that despite it all, uh, there is goodness in the world, and they can't take that away from us. But it sure does hurt. So yeah,
Sure. No, exactly. And remember that incredible concert in Palmyra. Look, the enemy we're up against is really satanic.
exactly.
The expression principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. If you think about what they did in Palmyra, this incredible ancient Silk Road city with that beautiful amphitheater there, which has now been bombed. And what did they do there? ISIS came in and they started beheading everybody right on the stage. I mean, just the most horrific desecration. So one of the things the Russians did was to liberate Palmyra and then hold a beautiful concert of classical music, opened with a Bach chaconne on solo violin. This was very powerful because it's a way, not using a spoken language, of saying we are asserting the beauty of mankind, the dignity of man, of human civilization. That's what this is about. It was an extremely Schillerian moment. And I think this is something that we have to revive in the United States. I think Americans get a little bit nervous about being vulnerable. When you engage in something beautiful, when you try to sing or play an instrument or recite a poem, you're exposing yourself in a way. You're exposing something that you hold precious, which somebody might cruelly reject. And so you have to have the kind of strength or confidence to not be hurt if people don't understand or don't appreciate what it is that you're offering. But I think this is very important right now. And actually, I'll tell you, I think the American people are in a mindset where they're prepared for heavy ideas and for beauty. We have a situation now in New York, which is quite exciting. I myself, even though I'm not student age or anywhere near it, have been going with a bunch of some of our younger members to university campuses. And we are getting an incredibly open response. We're getting a lot of arguments. People are horribly brainwashed by their smartphones and everything else, the narratives they're supposed to believe. But there's a lot of young people who are not brainwashed, who figured things out, who are thinking for themselves. A number of them, I was reflecting on this one particular day where a number of students independently, I was talking about not having a war with Russia, and they just said on their own, we should get rid of nuclear weapons. We should get rid of nuclear weapons. Well, if I were 18 or 19 or 20 years old, probably I would be thinking the same thing. And if there's a whole generation of people who thinks that, why not? Why couldn't we get rid of them? Why couldn't we get mankind into a new paradigm, as Helga LaRouche says, or General Douglas MacArthur? After the nuclear bombs were dropped in Japan, he said, we're done. If we insist on using war to resolve our conflicts, then Armageddon is on its way, because we can now annihilate the entire human species.
Well, there's so much there. Um, I do like MacArthur because he was primarily a soldier, and I think it is, as far as his connection with my father, makes me really want him to be a hero. And I think there's an awful lot of people out there that would like to take him off of that pedestal, simply because he's associated with a very conservative view of American politics, not necessarily the one that liberals conjure when they think of conservatives, but someone who respects the Constitution and really wants to. If you're going to fight, fight, get it over with, go home.
Right.
That's George Washington. That is the American military tradition. And this is what exactly we're up against when you have the Dulles brothers running things, and they're able to do whatever they want to by using covert actions that have built-in quote plausible deniability unquote. If we don't get rid of this plausible deniability, we're sunk, and that's a, a corollary to what MacArthur said, I believe.
Yeah, the thing that struck me about him, I haven't read extensively his writings, although I read his reminiscences, and I read a book by Admiral Kinney, or the Air Force, uh,
General Kenny.
General Kinney, yeah, which the MacArthur I know, which was very interesting. Um, but the thing that really comes across about MacArthur is agape. He actually loved people, and he loved the people of Asia. He didn't want to just go in and slaughter them. You saw that in his dedication to the people of the Philippines, how completely tortured he was about what he felt was the lack. He kept promising them that aid was coming. It didn't, um, and he had to leave. But then when he was confronted with having to run Japan, the military occupation of Japan, he took this so seriously, and he really was tormented. He said, I can't think of any military occupation that's worked. Either it's been too strict and too brutal, which provokes a revolt. And he said, if we provoke a revolt in Japan, we're going to need 3 million troops to come out over here. That's not going to work. And if we're too soft, this fascist, trend is going to come back. He really had to think deeply how to ensure that there was justice, that some of the worst war criminals were tried. He didn't see how you could avoid doing that, although he insisted that the emperor had to be left alone in effect, that this would be too much of a humiliation. And the emperor actually, they developed a very good working relationship. But that was very striking to me, how personally he took that, and that he trusted the Japanese people uh, within this framework of a certain principle of justice, that they would figure out a way to govern themselves. And of course, he also brought all kinds of economic development, because you still had the FDR legacy in the United States. So you had starvation, you had a massive need for reconstruction. He addressed a lot of these things, getting food and medicine in there, really something. And describes when, I forget, the prime minister, they came to his office and said, I have to talk to you about something, but I don't think you're going to agree with me, or I don't know how you're going to respond. The prime minister was very, very nervous. And MacArthur said, well, what is it? And the prime minister said, I don't think Japan should have a standing army. I don't think that we should engage in war, period. We may have to have some kind of minimal defense, but we should not be prepared to wage war. And MacArthur said he completely agreed, and that he wished that this would just be the first nation, and that every nation would come to that conclusion. That was very surprising when I read that.
It's a remarkable thing, and thanks for bringing it back to our consciousness, because Japan has been a bastion of peace and freedom, no matter what its economic difficulties have been, and we have periodic calls for them to militarize, and they're trying to do it now, of course, to promote the big war against China, which we're being told is inevitable by our military brass. What do you think? Is there a confrontation with China coming?
Well, they intend to have one. They have a little problem, though, which is that China is working with about 140 other nations in the Belt and Road. So, this is the tricky we have to really be on guard and work our rear ends off here in the United States to get a shift. But because I think we're really on the cusp of a totally new era. I think that at least 2/3, if not 3/4 or 4/5 of the world is looking at the United States, the UK, the NATO countries, and saying, you people have gone completely mad. And not only that, you have nothing to offer us. We see how you treat your allies. You blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Why would anyone want to be in an alliance with the United States if that's how you're going to be treated? You know, the saying, with friends like that, who needs enemies? And you're finding these nations are now getting bolder and bolder and bolder and just saying flat out, no. Brazil said, no, we're not going to send any ammunition to Ukraine. No, we don't care if you need it for the weapons. We're not going to do it. That wouldn't have happened even a couple of years ago, but it's happening now. So I think there is a very real possibility that humanity could win this fight to get out of this Anglo-Dutch liberal system. But of course, that's what makes it so dangerous, because if the powers that be, the billionaires' Great Reset Club, intends not to lose control, what will they resort to keep control? Would it be nuclear war? Would it be biological war, chemical war? What kind of false flag incidents? Who knows what a desperate and dying machine of spoiled, arrogant, delusional billionaires will come up with. But that's the danger that we're dealing with.
No, they're not dying, delusional, spoiled. They're almost there. They're almost to their goal. Come on, Diane, give them a little credit. They've almost conquered the entire world, and here you are nitpicking. Give the people the credit they deserve. They almost have got the
Right.
whole world in their hand. I
Yeah,
often
except for about 6 billion of us, but you're right.
well. I I pity the 6 billion because the elites really have so much power right now, and it is frightening. And I was going to ask your opinion of when we were talking about they are satanic, and we were talking about fascism and how uh, a person like MacArthur is very sensitive and wanting to build a future that's free of that. Um, our country right now seems to be headed towards a fascism with the totalitarian control over every aspect of our lives. And I think, one of the themes that doesn't get enough credit at all is the individual rights that are guaranteed. Most of us would say by our creator, but at least by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution being the supreme law of the land. Why is there any question about our individual rights? This is what's slipping away. This is the Klaus Schwab idea of gradually taking away our individual rights so that they can have more and more control over our options and our health and our futures, and to collect data as to to help them in their own research into humanity and whatever else they're looking into in those crazy BSL-4 labs and whatever else they're doing. The dark side of what's happening right now is huge. It is very well financed, and this satanic aspect of it is sold as a kind of a religion, even a justification in a way, a Luciferian uh, religion that allows for bad things to be done as long as there is ultimate good in the product, no matter how much individuals or groups might suffer in the meantime. Satanic thinking, Diane, how do we confront it and how do we point it out? Uh, and if I can just lay one more layer on this, and this is the other thing that's been bugging me so much lately, is that once you start identifying yourself as anti-liberal, every liberal in the world suddenly decides that you are a racist. You're a racist just because you don't agree with them. So all of the things that they've been taught are the characteristics of your typical right wing, Confederate flag carrying goober, you know, are now applied to you just because you disagree with them. And that's the other big problem is how do we how do you tell a liberal that they're wrong?
Well, you tell them and they probably won't listen, but happily reality is going to come crashing down on their head. Look, they wouldn't have to censor us so much if they had good control over things. You know, if you're right and you're telling the truth, you don't have to censor people because you can just present the evidence. You just present the truth. Now, we have people like John Brennan, former head of the CIA, who's now, of course, an anchor newsman at MSNBC, who told us, I don't do evidence. Well, perhaps the reason he doesn't do evidence is because he's lying all the time. And I think the American people are beginning to get a sense of that. The support for sending weapons and more money to Ukraine is rapidly dwindling. It's finally below 50%. People are quite outraged and concerned about what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, with the train wreck and the chemicals released. And I just learned, do you know we have over 2 train derailments per day in this country? That's how extreme it is. That's what a broken down junk heap we are. And they try to keep us from figuring it out by never discussing it in the mainstream news. So if you think that our rail system is a mess, then you're supposed to believe that you're just an isolated individual who has a crazy conspiracy theory and no one else agrees with you because no one's going to put a grid up of where all these accidents are. But there's only so long you can continue that. That's why I'm saying it's dangerous. And frankly, we do still have more freedom here than a lot of people. Like in the UK, they were trying to have a sister rally to the Rage Against the War Machine, as we had in DC on February 19th. So they got a venue, they began organizing, and the next thing you know, the venue canceled. Then they got another venue, begin organizing, and that one canceled. So finally, they had to get a place owned by Venezuela, I think, Bolivar Hall or something. And they didn't tell people where it was until the night before or the morning of or something like that to ensure they could even have a place to gather. And when they did, they had a couple thousand people. This was an indoor, like a teach-in kind of thing. And I believe what they said is they had so many people, they had to do the same meeting 3 times in a row so that everyone could get in and hear it. So in spite of the tremendous attempt to crush people and get them to give up and to be divided, what we are seeing, I think, is a shift in that where people are saying, okay, you know what? We may have major disagreements on global warming, on COVID, on drug legalization, on LGBTQ, but if we have a thermonuclear war, we'll never be able to resolve any of these other disagreements or fight them out. So why don't we put all this other stuff aside and make sure that the human species is not annihilated? And that spirit was so tangible at that Rage Against the War Machine rally on the 19th. That was one of the most amazing experiences I've been in, to be in a large rally like that, where everyone clearly had come into it in an elevated frame of mind. And you could see it because when they tried to provoke people by having a clown with a Ukrainian, I mean, literally dressed up like Bozo, trying to provoke, or 15 people on bicycles with Ukrainian flags, no one even reacted. It was like hitting Teflon, because people were in a mindset where they had already said, okay, we are prepared to encounter people with whom we may have disagreements and we're not going to react. And that even carried over to provocateurs. It was really quite something.
It really was, and I thought you did a great job. I really thought your speech was fantastic.
Mhm.
All of them were. my friend Garland Nixon, I thought was a terrific rabble rouser, and he starts off by saying, "I'm a lefty," but we're not going to get anywhere unless we work with people from other points of view, and that's what we did that day. And I saw people with the communist Chinese flag, the Russian flag. There even was one that I didn't know what it was until somebody asked the man, "What is that flag?" He said, "This is the Russian imperial flag." Oh no, the Romanovs are back. So there, but here he was. He had his flag. It was like black, white, yellow, I think. And but all of the rainbow flag was there. The LGBTQ flag was there, and all of the people were peaceful and walking around just like I remember peace rallies in the '60s and '70s. And that music was great. Uh, a woman sang Bob Dylan's "Masters of War," which as I as I sang along with her, kind of quietly, I just was thinking how I wish that all of the people that I know that would have sang this song in the '60s were here singing it now in the 2020s. I wish they were all here because if you really are anti-war, you got to be anti all war. You can't just be against the wars that you think are bad. This is a moral issue that needs to be confronted, and people seem to willingly just. It's kind of like becoming bystanders of life. You step back and you say, "Well, I'm not really involved anymore. I'm just watching. I just wonder what they'll do next." That is the opposite of the feeling that we had back in the '60s and '70s when it was our turn to be young, our turn to say, "Hey, we need to fix this world." And what happened to our politics that turned so many of those great peaceniks into couch potatoes, I guess? Is that too harsh?
No, and I think you know this story better than I do, which is the assassinations in the 60s, the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and perhaps worse than the assassination, LaRouche always thought it was critical, was the Warren Commission cover up.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a way of imposing fear, right? That everyone knew it was a lie. How could you have a bullet that went in however many different directions? It just made no sense whatsoever. It violated every law of physics.
Hmm.
And everyone was told you must believe this, and various witnesses somehow ended up dead. And I think this really put a chill into people being active. They said, "Well, I'd like to live a long life. I don't really need to know the truth of this that badly." And people became small. So it was a real cultural shift in the United States from one of optimism to the fear, which is always precedes brainwashing. And then we had a shift into the so-called post-industrial economy, the consumer economy. Think about the irony. How can you have a consumer economy if you don't have any producers? I mean, we did it for a while, consuming everything from everywhere else in the world, particularly China. But then what else do you discover? Well, when you only consume, you don't know anything about the process of production. So you have crazy people who think we can sustain human life without energy, without modern transportation. All you do is sit there, order it on your computer, and Amazon magically is going to deliver it to your door, and never mind how they managed to get it there. It's we've really become very insular and foolish. It's not an irreversible process, but I do think that that period of the 60s was extremely set us back a long ways and made it possible to do something like 9/11, for example, which we still haven't gotten to the bottom of. And LaRouche was very clear about that. He said, if you don't address the fact that everyone knows that no one from outside the United States could have created the conditions where all these hijackings and planes and everything could have occurred, that there had to be an inside element. If you're not going to pursue that inside element, then that internal element is lurking in the United States, ready to strike again in another form. And frankly, we've been living under that. So we've got to shift it.
That is the horrible truth of after World War II is that, they admit that there was this Operation Paperclip, which brought in scientists, and of different specialties and many with horrible pasts, but they don't admit that they also brought in tens of thousands of operatives under the Operation Gladio type of people. In other words, folks that are sleeper agents and that have been here all the time. And we tolerate it. And we tolerate it because we tolerate the CIA. We tolerate it was because we tolerate our presidents not pushing to know what is really going on. And we tolerate it because our media is completely owned by the big corporations that are profiting from the whole economy. So if our media is not going to allow us to even talk about the truth, we really are screwed. So this is, where I guess that's my motivation. I want to do what I can to, what I call undo the coup. Because what is in 1963, the assassination of President Kennedy was a coup d'état and nothing less than a coup d'état. And until the American people realized that our government was taken away, it wasn't just one man; it was the whole shebang was gone, taken over, and the people that have been running it since then have been running a school play to show us that perhaps there's this vestige of democracy that you can pretend exists, but no. We all know that you get to vote once every couple of years or every 4 years, but what's the real choice? The real choice between Orange Man and the latest Klaus Schwab surrogate that the Democrats throw up there. Um, it's no choice. It is a choice because you're stuck. You have to pick one of them. But the idea that we're actually running a democratic republic here, people still hang on to it, but it was a coup.
It was a coup, and I think that's why certain things like demanding the release of the files on the Kennedy assassination is so important. We know now that it was Pompeo who prevented Donald Trump from releasing all of them, and then it just came up again, and Biden withheld at least 5,000 pages or some amount of documents on that assassination. You're absolutely right on that question. It was a coup. Uh, and this is so important. We have to get to the truth of it. People who were involved in this should be brought to justice. The American people have to develop a certain kind of maturity to face the truth and learn the truth and consider where our nation really should be had Kennedy not been assassinated. And then I would say the follow on is the LaRouche case. Why were they so eager to silence LaRouche and call him all these names? Because what he was working to organize was the post-World War II world that FDR intended, an end to colonialism, an economic system which would allow every nation to develop, to eradicate poverty, to have a maximum number of young people becoming geniuses in whatever field they wanted to be. So I mean, you have some idea. We only are beginning to get a sense of how totally prolific LaRouche was in his writings. After he passed away, all kinds of things were discovered that people didn't know about, correspondence with heads of state and this and that, and papers and books about how to develop virtually every inch of the not the United States, the planet Earth, the moon, and Mars he was working on. And if you look at what's happening now in the so-called global South, actually you see a lot of LaRouche's ideas coming to fruition. And Sergei Glaziev, the Russian economist, on the centennial of LaRouche's birth, actually said that the nations that are doing well, that are prospering, are listening to LaRouche's ideas. There's an openness, and it's, I think, perhaps more direct than we often think.
But the forces against are mighty, and part of it, I think, there is a desire on their part to actually break the United States.
Of
As it was in the Civil War, was an attempt by the foreign banking powers to break the United States, and now I think we're facing the same thing. And the idea of all of these explosions and derailments and industrial quote accidents, then the food processing, the chickens, the eggs. I mean, it goes on and on. People will say this is more than a coincidence that all these things are happening at once. And are these sleeper agents getting active? Are they starting to take down our infrastructure in a methodical, slow way, but subtly undermining our ability to feed ourselves, to take care of our business, and to sustain our economy?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, we've been so foolish about investing in maintaining infrastructure. It's very hard to tell whether certain things are deliberate or whether they're the result of an insane policy. And in one sense, we don't have to actually know, because if you force the policy to change, if you fight to change the policy, then the people who are imposing that evil policy are going to emerge. You're going to discover who your enemies are. That's what I loved about the Rage Against the War Machine. You could tell who the sleeper agents in the leftist peace movement were, because they were all the ones squawking, "Oh, how dare you appear next to the Libertarian Party?" Oh, Rachel Madcow, the great liberal talk show host, right? She said, "And you had Proud Boys with Russian flags and the remains of the Lyndon LaRouche cult." So I guess that's what I and Helga and Jose Vega represent. We are the remains of the LaRouche cult. I mean, just her apoplectic rage fit indicated the power of it, but also exposed her. And for what she is, which is an agent of exactly what you're talking about. And that was the beauty of it, that people should have learned that the ones who screamed and object are the ones that are the problem. And I think there'll be more moments like that where more people are going to expose themselves. Be an ugly sight.
Yes. Is there a train going by, Diane?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear that?
I can hear it. Yeah, it's charming.
Yeah.
Don't have any trains going by down here on Mystery Island.
That's good. Yeah, there's a lot of trains, mostly passenger, but late at night it turns into freight.
All right. Well, we've got a few more minutes. One more topic. Well, I'll let you pick it.
Well, I think we've sort of touched on things. I'd really like to get more across this idea of the new paradigm, because I think Americans don't realize how different things are in the rest of the world. I did a program on Friday about the East Palestine rail collapse and what happened. That's where I heard this alarming figure about 2.5 derailments per day. And a person wrote in and said, that whole description of the trains caused me to reflect. This person had been in China in 2016. And she said, I used to take a train from Detroit to I don't know where, and it would be anywhere from 5 to 8 hours. You couldn't even, it was 250 miles. It would take 5 to 8 hours to get there. And it was sort of a crapshoot whether it would be 5 hours or 8 hours, depending what went wrong with the train that day. So she took a train from Beijing to Xi'an, I think, somewhere. It's about 750 miles. She didn't say how long it took, but she said when they got off the train, the translator was waiting for her and was very upset because the train was 10 minutes late.
Mm.
745-mile train ride, and it's only 10 minutes late. Almost unimaginable. And other people have taken those trains. And I saw a video when they first opened the maglev that goes from, is it from Beijing to the airport, where they have a cup of coffee on the table. It doesn't even move, nothing. The acceleration, deceleration, these trains are so unbelievably smooth. People don't probably have to go sit in their seats when the thing starts. It's just, it's
Where
amazing.
where did you see the maglev?
It was a video of the
Oh,
Chinese maglev, which they built from, I think, Beijing to the airport. Or was it Shanghai? I forget which major city, but just, it wasn't a long one. And remarkable. But even the high-speed rail, which is not maglev, also is extremely smooth, extremely
yeah.
well run. And I think they don't want Americans to know about it because then everyone would be outraged and ask why we weren't doing it here.
Well, yeah, our Congress has all that tied up there. That's why the East Coast corridor is never going to be improved because, everybody's got their own personal interests and, you know, campaign contributions talk. So I think that's where our problem is in the divided politics and jurisdictions all along the way that are just not going to cooperate. I
True, but I do really want to say the people have more power. American people have an enormous amount of power, and we've abdicated our responsibility. And I think everyone has to start acting. Your congressman will respond if enough people gang up on them. You can get them to change.
All right, well, let's leave it with a clear message then. The message for our congressman tonight is on Syria, and what would you like us to tell them?
They should co-sponsor and vote in favor of House Concurrent Resolution 21 or 20, both of them, frankly, to get our troops out of Syria. We should get out of there. We should stop stealing their oil and their wheat, and the sanctions need to be lifted immediately. And I would like to further say that Americans are going to be judged. We will be judged in the balance and found wanting if we don't do something about this.
It is a terrible, terrible situation, and thank you for bringing it to our attention, Diane. Thanks for all the great work that you do with the Schiller and the LaRouche organization, and thanks for going out there with the young people and your bullhorn. Boy, I see you with the bullhorn, and I say, "Oh boy, here it comes, here it comes." All right, Diane Sare will not be silenced, and more power to you. Thank you.
Thank you.